Yeah, so thank you for coming to the uh, sixth now of 7 business development webinars. This is the third and final week we're spending on the business model canvas. Before we get started, I want to give a few plugs. So, as always, this series is working towards Startup Week, which is the Student Startup Center's business competition, which is in a little less than 2 weeks. It's May 25th through 29th. I will post both a link to the website for Startup Week, as well as a link to an interest form, respectively. So if you're interested in competing, whether or not you have a team ready or not, you can sign up there and get more information.
I have a question.
Sure.
So is I just came in, this is for the Student Startup Week?
Yeah, so this is, this series is kind of teaching a lot of the different, touching on a lot of the different areas that are going to be playing a role in the deliverables for the competition. So
Okay.
the competition, kind of the two main deliverables are a sort of document describing the problem you're addressing, as well as your solution to it. Then the second part of it is just a simple product demo. So this series touches a lot on that document.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. And my other question was just real quickly, if I had registered for the Student Startup Center virtual week, and I have a team and I listed my team members out, do they need to also individually each register?
Great question. No. So if you, sorry, cat.
No, you're good.
Um, if you sign up with your team, that's plenty good, as long as we have the names of that team, of
Okay.
each member of your team.
Okay, because we did have each of us just independent, like we listed all of our team members in each of our registrations, but we weren't sure, and we weren't sure when deadlines were on registering too, so we wanted to just make sure, like double check. So that's what
For
we did.
sure. Yeah, both are fine.
Okay.
And that we've only sent out an interest form thus far. It's looking like that's going to be our sort of official sign up. So yeah, it's good either way.
Now for scheduling, because my team members, we all are affiliated with different things, with work, school, so on and so forth. We want to make sure that we're all available for the competition throughout the week. What is the schedule like? Are you guys going to be posting that on the website? How is that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like times, is there this event
Yeah.
at this time going on?
Yeah, we're going to be posting that on the website, I believe, by this weekend. So I know, so the kind of launch session, information session, is going to be Monday at 10. And then there's several events
10
throughout the week.
a.m. or p.m.?
AM, yeah. And there's several events throughout the week, but of course nothing is mandatory. As long as you turn in something by the end of the week that meets all the criteria, you're good to go. But of course, all of the different sessions are recommended.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. This is
Yeah,
really
of
helpful.
course. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the presentation for today. So like I said, this is the third of 3 presentations talking about business model canvas. I wanted to clarify, so today we're going to be talking about channels, key partners, and cost structures. First, I wanted to clarify something that I kind of misspoke about last week in regards to revenue streams. So I stated that you should consider and include any sort of financing, so like taking on loans, as part of your revenue streams. It's pretty important to recognize that debt is not revenue. And when you're recognizing revenue, that should really exclusively be sales from customers. That said, you might want to take on debt at some point to finance your company, but that should be considered a separate thing. So so moving on to channels. Channels are essentially just how your value proposition reaches your customer. So what platform or services are you using for your delivery? If I have a physical product, I need to ship that to my customer. If I have a platform, how is my customer accessing that platform? Are they doing it through their laptop? Are they doing it through a mobile device? How are they accessing it? How are they essentially receiving our value proposition? And then also for physical goods and sometimes digital goods, where can your customer buy them? So do I need to go to Target to buy this product, or can I just go onto your website to buy it? So we're going to go ahead and go back to the case study we've been working on and start talking about those value propositions in the channels. So our company that we're kind of doing this case study through, Green Thumb Inc., just as a reminder, we stated that our value proposition is that we provide new gardeners with all the tools, materials, and knowledge needed to start their own garden. And then last week we talked about different ways that could be manifested, specifically talking about key activities. We're going to have a website to maintain, so both for branding and then also to access our goods, and then also related to the actual product. I'm not sure if it's on this. Yeah, I don't think it's on this page. It's customer. Yeah. We talked about having sort of digital content, like how-to content on a website, and that kind of touches on the knowledge aspect of our value proposition. So going back to channels, feel free to go on a volunteer basis, but let's itemize the different parts of our value proposition that we need channels for. So how about Isabel? What is one aspect of our value proposition? Isabel's not there. Okay. Mia.
Like, I guess the aspect of our value proposition would be providing like the materials to our customers. So like the channel, I guess, could be like a website to buy it from, and then like utilizing like trucks and like delivery vehicles to transport it.
Okay. I'm going to list that as a separate channel, but they're both kind of tied to the same aspect of our distribution network, same aspect of our value proposition, which is providing materials. Can you elaborate what you mean by materials?
Well, I guess like we're providing them like plants, but also weren't we like providing them like some of the like tools and things too?
Yeah, so things like seeds, tools, kind of miscellaneous aspects.
Yeah.
Awesome. So where else do we want to, where else can our customers buy our product? Sure, we have a website, but is that all we're doing?
Social media.
Yeah.
Social media. I'm going to list that off to the side because that's kind of that's a way to market things, not necessarily a way for customers to purchase directly. So, I'm sure we all get all these ads on Instagram of like, oh, buy our product, pitch in for our brand, whatever. And when we click on those ads, if you do click on those ads, you don't buy through Instagram, but rather it redirects you to their website so that you can then purchase it. So social media is good, but that's kind of a bit of marketing. I guess what I'm getting at is, do we have any sort of physical presence in stores? Are there other more well-established platforms that we're accessing? How about Fernando?
I'm not sure about another example, but could it be like something related to to the the videos like we were talking last week about like the videos of how to
Yeah,
like do your own garden and stuff?
absolutely. So what is the channel that we use for our kind of how-to videos?
I don't know, YouTube.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So the only other aspect that I was kind of trying to weed out from people is any sort of physical presence. So um, if we're providing materials, it's pretty common for those sorts of things to be sold in retail stores. Maybe we don't want to sell in retail stores. You know, maybe we don't necessarily want to put in the time and effort to. And actually, I won't put it down. But as a possibility, you know, maybe we want to sell our product through like Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace or small garden stores, things like that. So that's another aspect of channels that we could um, try to take advantage of. We don't necessarily have to. You know, a lot of new companies, a lot of new brands are trending towards most of their presence being entirely online, like with a lot of those brands that you get ads for on Instagram, like I mentioned. So it's perfectly reasonable to have, you know, your entire presence online, but depending on your kind of target customer segment, maybe that's not the best idea. So we identified a couple of segments. So we identified kind of college age students, which, you know, social media, sure, they're gonna see that. Retirees, maybe if we do Facebook ads, and hobbyists, that's kind of a mixed bag, I would say. So um, having an entirely digital presence might actually be fine. Fernando, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. So for like a startup company like this one, is it like what's the smartest way to like choose your channels? Like is it better to focus in just one, so like go like
Mhm.
100% on the web, or try to like start on like small gardening like companies like you said?
For sure. I would say there's two things to consider when trying to answer that. The first is what kind of talent your team has. So if on your team you have some real solid social media marketing gurus, then it's probably going to be in your best interest to focus on that. If your team is maybe composed of one or two people who are better at developing relationships with people, kind of building out that distribution and retail network, then maybe you want to go more of a kind of boots on the ground, product in the store approach. Um, so that's one thing to consider when deciding what direction to go. The other big thing to consider is what has worked for you in the past. So one of the really uh, kind of key aspects of the business model canvas is that it's quote unquote lean. And basically all that means is that you're operating your business in such a way that you're not entirely committed to any specific approach. So maybe you start off with your social media approach because it has very low initial kind of cost to it. You know, you set up your AWS account or whatever else, or you set up your ad account with Facebook, and then you start selling these ads, your costs really are tied to you selling the individual ad. There's not a very large like membership fee, if you will. Whereas if you wanted to build out a distribution network, a lot of those costs might be up front. So it might be a little bit more capital intensive, and maybe something you should try second or third. Or maybe it's something you want to try first because you know nothing about social media. So it's sort of a play by ear thing, but in reality, it's more of a play to your strengths. For sure. Cool. So if there are no other questions on that, we'll move on to the next section. Key partners. So last week we talked about key resources and key activities. This is the third key in the business model canvas, and they're actually related to the previous two. The questions you're going to want to answer are who are your most important partners, just kind of in general. Who are the individuals or companies that you're working with in order to develop or execute your value proposition? And the questions you want to ask about these partners is, what are the key activities that your partners perform? And what are the key resources that your partners provide? So hopping back over to the sheet, we have our key partners. So I'm just going to copy over our resources and activities, just kind of verbatim. And we don't have to fill out all of these, but this is what we came up with last week for key resources. And this is what we came up with for key activities. So, Dylan, what is the key partner that we're going to work with for our materials? Dylan, man. Okay, Peter, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. So what is the partner we're going to be working with to get our materials?
To get our materials, I'm not too sure. Maybe some retailer like Lowe's or Home Depot.
Okay. So let's think about who Lowe's and Home Depot are marketing towards. Generally, they're selling to contractors and kind of DIYers. And so they have a lot of kind of cost built into their price. So as I suppose a question I would have is, wouldn't it make more sense to go kind of further down the supply chain and maybe look at who their suppliers are? And I don't necessarily expect the names of firms.
Right. Yeah, I think that works better. Yeah, I just don't know where the upper in the supply chain comes from, but yeah, I think that's better.
Sure. That's probably a bad example on my part, just because knowing who those suppliers are is going to require a knowledge of the industry. How about something that might make a little more sense? Actually, let me phrase it this way.
Maybe
go ahead.
Nonprofits. You could
Okay.
strategically partner with them for
which aspect?
You just strategically partnering with nonprofits for the fact that if you're supplying based on what your company would be about and what you would be supplying, they could help kind of get your company out there, kind of gain exposure, gain customer base because of the fact that maybe what their mission is about. Maybe a lot of those nonprofits based around like green activity, helping
Okay.
out planet Earth kind of thing. Mhm.
Awesome. And so they might be helping with so you said kind of branding, advertisements,
Mhm.
getting the word
Exposure.
out. Um, and then I would imagine actually if we're trying to approach our business in a green way, which would make sense, it's in the name, green. Um, they might also help with figuring out who those suppliers are, like we're talking with Peter about, because they might know good resources for suppliers who practice environmentally friendly, processes or things like that. So I'm just going to write information in general as a resource.
And you're talking like manufacturing of the tools and getting the specific seeds and so on and so forth. You're talking
Yeah,
the raw material suppliers, right?
yeah.
Okay.
And that's just because last week we stated that this sort of company is focused mostly on the on selling these products. It's not much of a manufacturing company and more of a merchandising type thing.
Okay. Now, wouldn't you want to have partners that would help, not that aren't just suppliers, but also third-party distribution, like a Costco or a Home Depot?
Absolutely. Yeah. So kind of like what we were talking about with the channels. Um, if we want to have a sort of a footprint, then definitely it's probably not realistic to operate our own stores. So partnering with, um, like you said, Home Depot.
Especially with this kind of product, because I mean, realistically, you could start opening up your own stores, but if you have a virtual presence and you're more of a remote company at first, you have
Mhm.
the ability to work with nonprofits as well as, not put all of your supplies into these big major stores like Home Depot, Lowe's, Costco, but you could also then kind of do test tasters in those stores and just see how customers respond to your product being put into those stores.
Definitely. So that kind of ties into our R&D aspect, trying to figure out what works best for customers.
Hmm.
Awesome. So hopefully that's making sense for everyone. It's pretty straightforward in terms of what is a key partner. I would say based on this activity and in general, the difficult part of it is figuring out exactly who are those partners and developing those partnerships. It definitely requires a lot of time and effort to kind of cater those relationships. And then the third bit for today is cost structure. So cost structure is pretty important, and it's something that you definitely want to be very cognizant of when uh, actually trying to make your company profitable and trying to scale it. Um, the kind of core questions you want to ask initially are, what are the important costs that you incur to create and deliver your value proposition? So we make physical goods, but we also create digital content. So what are the costs that are associated with creating digital content? What are the costs associated with acquiring physical goods, changing them in some way or branding them in some way, and then selling those? And then another thing to think about is, what's the actual relationship between your costs? Do we have high cost per unit sold, so high variable costs, and low fixed costs, so like low general overhead, or is it the opposite? Does our product kind of cost a lot of money to produce at the outset, but once we've paid those initial costs, it's super cheap to make a bunch of them? So those are kind of the different aspects of cost structure to keep in mind. And of course, cost structure can get a lot more complicated, and it probably will, especially in a company where you are like buying and selling goods. So, Alex, what is one of the costs that we incur, and how is that cost distributed?
Something like employee salary.
Okay, yeah. So in accounting, that's generally listed as direct labor, or I'll just put labor. And what's the sort of, what might the cost distribution look like for that? Is it mostly fixed, kind of the same amount each and every month? Or is that really going to depend on how much stuff we're making?
Definitely variable.
Okay. Why variable?
Well, it depends on, maybe considering the topic being a green thumb incorporated, I would say that it would really have to do with the fact that your company could see an influx in demand or a fall in demand. Maybe there's been a dry season. Maybe it's too hot this season and people don't want to go out and garden. Maybe, you know what I mean? Really weather determines the factors. So, okay, if you're not producing as much, you're not hiring as many, that means your labor costs are going down overall. So as well as maybe there's an influx of increased demand. So now you need to hire seasonal workers to increase the supply of work when the demand is high.
Okay, I see where you're coming from. And that makes a lot of sense. If sales are high, it makes sense that labor would be high. But if you're a company that doesn't focus on manufacturing, often your sales aren't very closely tied with your manufacturing labor. And what I mean by that is, we'll think about what does it take for us in order to get our product. And let's just talk about our physical goods for now. What it takes is one of our salespeople or purchasing people, whatever you want to call them, places an order with our supplier, and then they send their stuff, and then our salespeople sells that.
So I was going to ask, really with labor, I feel like there's so many factors that go into this, right? So what stage is this company at, right? So if it's at a startup stage, like it's just internally just the founders, which then means you're looking at more of a fixed cost because it's just you as a team really being the sales associates really handling and going it out. But if there's more expanded team, then I feel like the labor is a little bit more varied. I feel like it depends on the stage of the company.
Definitely. I would definitely agree with that. And because it is pretty early, I would say it's fixed. The other thing is, if you're running really lean in terms of like generally low cost, you're not going to want to kind of hire and fire workers very often. It's generally a good idea to keep a few people on, especially with startups, having a few people who are more kind of generalists that can kind of fill whatever gaps are necessary.
Yeah.
So it's largely fixed. The other thing is, as a startup, you're probably not going to be spending a lot on labor in the first place. And most of it is focused on selling and administrative. So these two little acronyms are manufacturing versus selling and administrative. So our labor cost is largely focused on the back end of that, and largely fixed. Cool. What other costs are we incurring?
I would probably say website hosting, like an internal purchasing algorithm system. So like if someone's going to buy it from your website, to look up the goods, to create, having an item system that's all based around an algorithm. So I would say, algorithm development, insurance, licensing.
Cool. All good things. Yeah, so your website hosting is largely fixed. In terms of your internal purchasing algorithms or things like that, that cost I feel like is mostly tied to labor. Whoever you have working on that, that's where those costs comes from. And like we talked about, that's largely fixed. Licensing is, I would, if we do any licensing, it's largely going to be variable based on whatever products we have.
100%.
Yeah. Cool. Are there any questions on cost structure?
I was going to ask, would you consider, because there is, would this company have a startup house or a place to where, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because then would that be part of developmental costs? You know what I mean? So you're having to pay
definitely.
for a place for you guys to all get together and meet, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, office space.
Yeah, office space.
Yeah, I mean so that's a really good question. Often when you're talking about those sorts of things, and one of the difficult things about doing case studies in general, for something that's kind of abstract and theoretical is, we don't necessarily know oh, can we just go and stay at Kim's place and
Right.
do all this work, or do we need to go and rent out? So that's a great thing to be thinking about.
Now, would you say, for the purposes of, let's say for the startup virtual week, right? If you guys are asking, hey, what do your cost structure look like? What would you, if we were to see what your cost structure looked like? And I don't know what the deliverables would be, but if that was one of them, would it be better to account for these things like a possibility of an office space than leave it out? Is it better to anticipate that cost than expect no cost at all for you know what I mean?
That's a good question. I would say the best approach is to focus on what is definitely going to be the case. If you're buying and selling goods, trying to make a profit off of that, what I wrote down here, warehouse space, you're going to need a place to store that. That's definitely something that you're going to need. You're definitely going to need to actually pay for those goods, so there's costs associated with that. So first, account for those sorts of things.
Okay.
All the sorts of little odds and ends that seem kind of uncertain, maybe address in kind of just a blanket. This is a list of things that we're thinking about, but aren't the crux of our cost structure.
Okay, that makes total sense. Thank you.
For sure. All right. So some final notes. At this point, between today and the past 2 weeks, we've covered each aspect of the business model canvas. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how that kind of all fits together and how to kind of present that. So for Startup Week, it's all going to be in written form. So you can't necessarily walk someone through it and explain it. But there are kind of ways to arrange your canvas graphically, and how to elaborate on these sorts of connections that you see, hopefully in a way that becomes clear to the reader. So this is generally how the business model canvas is arranged. You kind of have your key partners, activities, resources over here, your value proposition in the center, and a lot of your customer focus, customer centric aspects off to the right. Why it's arranged like this, I'm not sure if there's any sort of good reason. but it's nice to have similar ideas close to each other. So your key partners, as we talked about today, are very closely related to your key activities and key resources. Your customer relations, how you execute those relations, are very closely tied to your customer segments, the groups of people you're actually selling to. And then off to the bottom, your revenue streams and your cost structure are likely to be kind of closely related. One thing that it might be a good idea, it might be worth too much effort, it might not be worth the effort, excuse me, is tying your cost structure to your revenue kind of scheme. So if your revenue scheme derives a lot of its value from repeat customers, maybe you want to have your kind of cost structure reflect that. So if we're getting, say we're getting $10 from this customer every month, it's going to make sense if the costs that we incur line up with that every month, which is kind of hard to illustrate in the abstract. But hopefully if you're kind of actually executing this whole thing on an actual company, that might become a little bit more clear. So maybe a better example of a more concrete example would be if we take Netflix, their subscription model. We pay them $7 a month times however many customers they have. So they have this kind of recurring monthly revenue. The costs that they would associate with that are sort of the licensing of the different the films and the TV shows, licensing is that they might also pay monthly. So they incur the cost at the same time that they get paid for that cost. Or maybe there's an offset of a month or something like that. But lining up your costs with your revenues temporally is generally a good idea, just to kind of have your business be a little consistent, cohesive. So when you're presenting your business model canvas, each of those boxes is filled with sort of just short bullet points, just to say, like, these are things that can contribute to this aspect. So, bullet points of the key partners that you're working with, but not necessarily too much information beyond that. That said, it's often a good idea to have accompanying explanations, and part of the deliverables for Startup Week will include explanations of each of these bullets. Why is partner X related to activity Y, and so on. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, go ahead and shout them out. But that is it for today. Thank you.